Chapter 3. All right, I was more willing to go make a try for a fat doe. I was all generally more than willing to go hunting anyway. And while I was gone, I might do some thinking about little Arliss and that thieving stray dog. But I didn't much think that my thinking would take the turn that Ma wanted me to. I went and milked the cows and then brought the milk in for Ma to strain. I fetched my rifle down and went out to the lot and caught Jumper. I tied a rope around his neck, half-hitched a noose round his nose, and pitched the rest of the rope across his back. This is the rope I'd rein him with. Then I got me a second rope and tied it tight around his middle, just back of his withers. This second rope I'd use to tie my deer onto Jumper's back, if I got one, of course. Pa had shown me how to tie a deer's feet together and pack it home across my shoulder, and I had done it. But to carry a deer very far like that was a sweat-popping job that, well, I'd rather just leave to Jumper. He was bigger and stronger. I mounted Jumper bareback and rode him around Birdsong Creek and across a rocky hogback ridge. I thought how fine it would be if I was sitting my own horse instead of this old mule. I rode down a long sweeping slope where a scattering of huge, ragged-topped live oaks stood about in grass so tall that it dragged under the underside of Jumper's belly. I rode to within a quarter of a mile to the salt licks and then left Jumper tied to a thicket and went on afoot. I couldn't take Jumper close to the licks for a couple of reasons. In the first place, he'd get to swishing his tail and stomping his feet at flies and maybe scare off my game. And on top of that, Jumper was gun-shy. You fire a gun close to Jumper, and he'd fall to stabs. He'd snort and wheel to run and fall back against his tie rope trying to break it loose. He'd bawl and paw the air and take on like he'd been shot. When it came to gunfire, Jumper didn't have any more sense than a red-hot ant in a hot skillet. It was a fine morning for hunting, with the air still and the rising sun shining bright on the tall green grass and the greener leaves of the timber. There wasn't much breeze, enough to blow and tell me the wind direction, so I licked one finger and held it up. Sure enough, the side next to me cooled first, and that meant that what little push there was in the air was away from me, towards the salt licks, which wouldn't do at all. No deer would come to the licks if he caught wind of me first. I did a little half circle round the licks till I got the breeze moving across them towards me, and then took cover under a wild grapevine that hung low out of the top of a gnarled old oak. I sat down with my back against the trunk of the tree. I sat with my legs crossed and my rifle cradled on my knees, and then I made myself as still as a tree. Pa had taught me that, way back when I was little, the same he had taught me to hunt downwind for my game. He always said, "It ain't your shape that catches a deer's eye, it's your moving. If a deer can't smell you and can't see you move, he won't never know that you're there." So I sat there, still as a stump, searching the clearings around the licks. The licks were scattered outcroppings of dark rocks with black streaks in them. The black streaks held the salt that Pa said had gotten mixed up with the rocks a jillion years ago. I don't know how he knew what had happened so far back, but the salt was there, and all the hogs and the cattle and wild animals in that part of the country came there to lick at it. One time, Pa said, when he and Ma had first settled there, they had run clean out of salt and had to beat up pieces of rock and boil them in water. Then they'd use the salty water to season their meat and the cornbread. Wild game generally came to the lick in the rocks in the early mornings or the late evenings, and those are the best times to come looking for meat. The killer animals like the bear and the panther and the bobcat knew this and came to the licks around the same time. Sometimes we'd get a shot at them, and I'd killed 2 bobcats and a wolf there while waiting for deer, and once Pa shot a big panther right after it had leapt on a mule colt, and broke its neck with one slap of its heavy forepaw. I hoped I'd get a shot at a bear or a panther this morning. The only thing that showed up, however, was a little band of javelina hogs, and I knew better than to shoot them. You make a bad shot and wound one so that he went to squealing, and you had the whole bunch after you ready to eat you alive. They were small animals, but their tusks weren't as large as those of the range hogs we were running wild in the woods. They couldn't cut you as deep, but once those javelinas got after you, they'd keep after you for a lot longer of a time. Once, Jed Simpson's boy, Roscoe, shot into a bunch of javelina, and they took after him. They treed him up a mesquite and kept him there from early morning till long after supper time. The mesquite was a small one, and they nearly chewed the trunk of it in two trying to get to him. After that, Roscoe was willing to let those javelinas alone. The javelinas moved away, and I saw some bob-white quail feed into the opening around the licks, and then here came 3 cows with young calves and a roan bull. They stood and licked at the rocks. I watched them a while, then got to watching a couple squirrels playing in the top of a tree that was close to the one that I sat under. The squirrels were running and jumping and chattering and flashing their tails in the sunlight. One would run onto a tree branch and then take a flying leap to the next branch. Then there it would sit and fussing and waiting to see if the second one had the nerve to jump that far. And when the second squirrel did, the first one would get up in an excited chatter and make a run for a longer leap. And sure enough, after a while, the leader tried to jump a gap that was too wide. And he missed his branch, clawing at some leaves, and came tumbling down to the ground. The second squirrel went to dancing up and down on his branch then, chattering louder than ever. It was plain he was getting a big laugh of how that show-off squirrel had made such a fool of himself. The sight was so funny that I laughed myself, and that's where I made my mistake. Where the doe had come from, or how she ever got to where she was so close to me without her seeing her, I have no idea. It was like she suddenly lit out of the air like a buzzard, or risen right out of bare ground, right around those rocks. Anyways, there she stood, staring straight at me, sniffing and a-snorting and stomping her 4 feet against the ground. She couldn't have scented me, and I hadn't moved. But I laughed out loud at those little squirrels, and that sounded giving her warning. Well, I couldn't lift my gun then, with her staring straight at me. She'd see the motion and take a scare. And while Pa was a good enough shot to down a running deer, I'd never tried it, and didn't much think I could do it. I figured it might be smarter to wait. Maybe she'd quit staring at me after a while and give me a chance to lift my gun. But I waited, and still she kept looking at me, trying to figure me out. Finally, she started coming towards me. She'd take one dancing step, and then another, and bob her head and flap her long ears about, and then she'd move towards me again. I didn't know what to do. It made me nervous, the way she kept coming at me. Sooner or later, she was bound to make out what I was, and then she'd whirl and be gone before I could even draw a bead upon her. She kept doing me this way till finally my heart was flopping around inside my chest like a catfish in a wet sack. I could feel my muscles tightening up all over. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. It was either shoot or bust wide open. So I whipped my gun up to my shoulder. And like I'd figure, she snorted and wheeled so fast that she was just a brown blur against my gun sights. I pressed the trigger, hoping my aim was good. After I fired, the black powder charge in my gun threw up such a thick fog of blue smoke that I couldn't see through it. I reloaded, and then leapt to my feet and went running through the smoke. What I saw when I came into the clear again made my heart drop down into my shoes. There went the frightened, snorting cattle, stampeding through the trees with their tails in the air like it was heel fly time. And right beside them went my doe, running all humped up with her white, pointed tail clamped tight against her rump. That meant that I'd hit her, but I hadn't made a killing shot. I didn't like that. I never minded killing for meat, and like Pa had told me, every creature has to kill to live, but to wound an animal was something else, especially one as pretty and harmless as a deer. It made me sick to think of a doe escaping, maybe to hurt for days before she finally died. I swung my gun up, hoping yet to get in a killing shot, but I couldn't fire on account of the cattle. They were too close to the deer. I might kill one of them by mistake. Then, suddenly, the doe did a surprising thing. Way down in the flat there, nearly out of sight, she ran head on into the trunk of a tree, like she was stone blind. I saw the flash of her light-colored belly as she went down, and I waited. She didn't get up. I tore out, running through the chin-tall grass as fast as I could give her. When finally I reached the place, all out of breath, I found her, laying dead, with a bullet hole through her middle, right where it had to have shattered the heart. Suddenly I wasn't sick any more. I felt big and strong and sure of myself. I hadn't made a bad shot. I hadn't caused an animal a lot of suffering. All I had done was get meat for the family, shooting it on the run, just like Pa did. I rode towards the cabin, sitting behind the gutted doe that I'd tied across Jumper's back. I rode feeling proud of myself as a hunter and a provider for the family. Making a killing shot like that on a moving animal made me feel bigger and even more important. Too big and important, I guess, to fuss with little Arliss about that old yeller dog. I still didn't think much of the idea of keeping him, but I guess that when you're nearly a man, you have to learn to put up with a lot of aggravations like little old bitty kids. Well, let old Arliss keep that thieving rascal. I guessed I could provide enough meat for him as well. And that's how I was feeling when I crossed Birdsong Creek and rode up to the spring under the trees below the house. Then suddenly I felt different. That's where I found little Arliss in the pool again. In there with him was that big yeller dog. That dirty, stinking rascal romping around in our drinking water. "Arliss!" I yelled at little Arliss. "You get that nasty old dog out of the water." They hadn't seen me ride up, and I guess it was my sudden yell that surprised both of them so bad. Arliss went tearing out of the pool on one side and the dog out the other. Arliss was screaming his fool head off, and here comes that big dog with his wet fur rised up on the ridge of his backbone, baying like I was a panther. Well, I didn't give him a chance to get to me. I was too quick about jumping off the mule and grabbing up some rocks. I was lucky. The first rock I threw caught that big dog right betwixt the eyes, and I was throwing hard. He went down, yelling and a pitching and a wallering, and just as he came to his feet again, I caught him in the ribs with another. Well, that was too much for him. He turned tail then and took out for the house, squalling and bawling. But I wasn't the only good rock thrower in the family. Arliss was only 5 years old, but I had spent a lot of time showing him how to pitch a rock, and now I wish I hadn't, because just about then a rock nearly tore my left ear off. I whirled around just barely in time to duck another that would have caught me right there square in the left eye. Well, I yelled, "Arliss, you quit that!" But Arliss wasn't listening. He was too scared and too mad. He bent over to pick up a rock big enough to brain me with if he was strong enough to throw it. And well, when you're 14 years old, you can't afford to mix in a rock fight with your 5-year-old brother. You can't do it, even when you're in the right. You just can't explain a thing like that to your folks. All they do is point out how much bigger you are and how unfair it is to your little brother. All I could do was turn tail like the yeller dog and head for the house, yelling for Mama. And right after me came little Arliss, naked and running as fast as he could, doing his dead level best to get close enough to hit me with a rock that he was packing along. I outran him, of course, and then here comes Mama, running so fast with her long skirts a-swishing and calling out, "What on earth, boys?" Well, I hollered, "You better catch that Arliss," as I ran past her, and she did. But little Arliss was so mad that I thought for a second he was going to hit her with the rock before she could get it away from him. Well, it all wound up just like I figured. Ma switched little Arliss for playing in the drinking water, and then she blessed me out good and proper for being so bossy with him, and the big yeller dog that had caused all the trouble, he got off scot-free. Didn't seem right or fair to me. How could I be the man of the family if nobody paid any attention to what I thought or said? I went and led Jumper up to the house. I hung the deer in the live oak tree that grew beside the house and began skinning it and cutting up the meat. I thought of the fine shot I'd made and knew it was worth bragging about to Ma, but what was the use? She wouldn't pay me any mind, not until I did something she thought I shouldn't have done. And then she'd treat me like I wasn't any older than little Arliss. So I sulked and felt sorry for myself all the time I worked with the meat, and the more I thought about it, the madder I got at that big yeller dog. I hung the fresh cuts of venison up in the dog run, right where old Yeller had stolen the hog meat the night before. I did it for a couple reasons. To begin with, it was the handiest and the coolest place we had for hanging fresh meat, and on top of that, I was looking for a good excuse to get rid of that dog. I figured if he stole more of our meat, Ma would have to see that he was too sorry and no account to keep. But old Yeller, he was too smart for that. He'd gnawed around on some of the deer's leg bones that Ma threw away, but not once did he ever even act like he could smell that meat that we had hung up. End of chapter 3.